Hi, I'm Colin.
And I'm Phil.
We're the hosts of Science Fiction 101.
It's a show which gets to the heart of science fiction. Books, films, TV. We've covered Star Trek,
Doctor Who,
Star Wars.
We love to explore the past, present, and future of science fiction.
And we'd love for you to join us
on Science Fiction 101.
Hi, Colin.
Hi, Phil.
Here we are again, recording in April 2024. And, Colin, did you get to see a partial solar eclipse this week?
No. One of the downfalls of being in Oregon is we have, pretty much persistent cloud cover. And so the sun was out, all 80% of it, but there was no one who saw any part of it.
Yeah, that's very familiar. In my lifetime, as far as I know, the UK has only ever had one total eclipse, and that was in 1999, and it only occurred over the very southwestern tip of England. And I don't live in the southwestern tip of England, so I didn't have a total eclipse. I had a partial eclipse, but just like Oregon, Britain is covered in cloud all the time. So, yeah, nobody saw a thing. It just got very dark at a certain point in the day, but it does that anyway sometimes.
Yeah, because the clouds get thicker or thinner as time goes by.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Later in today's show, we're going to be joined by a big-name guest, the Hugo and Nebula award-winning author Robert J. Sawyer, who is best known for Flash Forward.
The Hominid series.
And one of my favourites is the Oppenheimer alternative, and also one that we reviewed.
The Downloaded.
Yeah. So we reviewed the audio version a few episodes ago, but now the Downloaded is coming out as a conventional print book. And an ebook as well. So we thought we'd invite Rob Sawyer onto the show to talk about it. A little bit hesitant we were because we had picked a few nits with his Downloaded, but overall we quite liked it, and he very kindly agreed to an interview. So that's coming up in a while. We'll also have our usual recommendations of past, present and future science fiction. But first, responses to our last show, which was on the theme of what it means to be or not to be a science fiction fan. And I think it's fair to say that we got some of the best responses we've ever had, don't you think?
Yeah, on our Facebook post about the episode, there were 37 responses.
Yeah, and it's not just the quantity either. There were some really thoughtful things that people posted. Some things that I wish I'd thought of saying during the show. It was almost tempting to go back and edit bits in. But we won't do that.
It's good to be an editor.
Oh, well, it's true. With great power comes great responsibility, or whatever the phrase is. Some of these are quite long, and I think I'm very tempted, Colin, just to give it a bit of variety. I might use some AI voices to read these in the finished episode.
Oh, okay.
But we heard from Emmanuel, who said,
"A really great discussion. One of your best episodes, in my opinion."
Thank you very much for that. He says,
"I like the diversity of opinions that you offered as to what makes a true science fiction fan. For me, I got into it through movies and comics, like most people of my generation born in the 80s. But once I started reading science fiction novels, I found it much more rewarding. As for the community aspect, I like small groups who discuss it, simple as that. I'm part of a small Discord group which I enjoy greatly, and I listen religiously to your show and a couple other podcasts. It brings me much joy and satisfaction. So to answer your question, I think you are a science fiction fan if you enjoy it, in whichever form, and practice by either reading books or watching movies relatively regularly."
Yeah, some very good thoughts there from Emmanuel. Thank you for those. Michael commented,
"This was a great discussion.
These are the comments we love to hear, folks.
The problem of gatekeeping seems to rear up when people try and create binary statements. Is this science fiction or not? Are you a science fiction fan or not? The truth is that these are false dichotomies. What makes someone a fan is pretty much self-identification. The requirement basically is that you like some things and you identify some of those things as science fiction, and based on that, some predictions can be made about whether or not you may like other things and identify those as science fiction. Even liking something isn't at all binary. I can like parts of a thing to varying degrees. It's all a glorious continuum of tastes, experiences and engagement."
And I responded to Michael by saying, very true. And I remember in the episode talking about a diversity of attitudes and tastes among fans and readers and viewers and so on. But I hadn't thought about there being a kind of a continuum of tastes within each of us. We may like some things but not others, but without a clear dividing line. Everything is on a spectrum. So I thought that was a very thoughtful set of comments. Sue said,
"Fascinating discussion, gents. And thanks to Colin for working hard to find people and groups to talk with and to compile the results. I agree with Phil that for students and or those just starting out as SF explorers, it would be good to have a recommended list. But it should not be only a list of books and short stories, but also things to watch. That is, examples from diverse authors, different eras, different subgenres, films from different eras, graphic novels, etc. I also agree with Phil that suggestions from Amazon are pathetic algorithmic gasps toward, if you like this, you might also like this. Yes, curation is the magic word here, even slightly more magic than the word librarian in this one particular case. Thanks for a very enjoyable and thought-provoking episode."
For Sue to say something is more magic than the word librarian is very significant, because she is a librarian.
Oh, is that right? Right, okay.
Yeah.
I thought that was probably the case, just from context, but I wasn't sure. Andy says,
Great episode. Call yourself science fiction fans, but found my quiz too hard. Loved the discussion. However, there is gatekeeping. I wouldn't trust anyone who claims to be a science fiction fan, but hadn't seen Star Wars. It could be any film or episode.
yeah, good point. While I tend to agree with what Andy says, there are certain works which everyone really ought to have seen or heard. I think science fiction is such a vast field that you can't really say everyone must have seen this one particular thing. So, yes, Star Wars is an important film, but if somebody hasn't seen it, I don't think that rules them out as a science fiction fan, if there are compensating factors elsewhere, if you like. Anyway.
Yeah. Well, and didn't Harlan Ellison say that he didn't consider Star Trek science fiction at all?
He probably did say that, yeah.
So...
yeah. So then you get to the question of definitions again, and border lines, and then we get into gatekeeping again. So it's a slippery slope. Probably my favourite comment came from Damo.
Damo.
Damo, who said,
"Sadly, Phil, I have to tell you that my name Damo is pronounced Damo. It's short for Damien if you are from Dublin and have any friends. Had you grown up in Dublin, you would be called Philo, as is the case for the late Phil Lynott. And Colin would be called Collie."
So, welcome to the Philo and Collie show.
I like it. I have never had a nickname.
Oh, have you not?
So yeah, being called Collie sounds actually kind of cool.
Yeah, but it's sort of... people will imagine that you're like Lassie. You're a dog.
I do have a long nose, and I am somewhat hairy on the face, but not on the nose. So,
Damo also said, "Don't try and do the accent," and it's a good job he said that because I was very tempted. On the subject of science fiction fans, Damo said,
"This was a great episode, guys. A very good discussion of the meaning of fandom and being a fan. I would suggest that you came very close to but left out two important words: love and community. SF fans are the way they are, passionate about the genre and as argumentative as a bag of cats because they love the genre, sometimes too much."
Yeah, very good point, Damo. And I think we were trying to be very analytical and very empirical, basing things on Colin's research findings. And yeah, I guess we left out some of the incredible warmth that people feel for science fiction, those who are serious fans. And Bart said,
"That was another fun episode, guys. Actually never thought of fandom in that way. I personally experienced that podcasts like yours contribute to my personal development and broaden my taste in science fiction. Thanks for this."
Yeah, thank you, Bart. We're glad to have been of service. So some really interesting insights in those comments. So many thanks for commenting, folks. We'd love you to comment in that sort of way on every topic that we do. Obviously, some things are more contentious than others, and some things invite people to express their opinions more than others. But that was really good. And it was interesting, too, that we had comments from all over the world. People from the UK, Ireland, Netherlands, Australia, US, Canada. Those are the ones I noticed. There might have been people from elsewhere as well.
I love a great discussion like that, whether it's, you and I doing it or doing it on Facebook.
Yeah, I do too. It's great. We also got a bit of response to our quiz last time, in particular regarding a quote which was supposedly from Back to the Future 2, but which a number of people pointed out is also in Back to the Future full stop, which means Colin really should have had an extra point. But we don't really keep scores, do we?
No.
And I have to say, I didn't fact check that quiz. It was just one that I found online. But nor have I fact checked those comments from people who said the quote was in the first film. So who knows where the truth lies, folks? Who knows? But we always like to hear from you, so please post your comments on Facebook, where you will find us as Science Fiction 101 Podcast, or on our blog at 101sf.blogspot.com. Now, are we ready to talk to award-winning author Robert J. Sawyer?
I'm ready, yeah.
Okay. Hi, Phil here, with just a little note added during the editing of this episode. As you're about to hear, The Downloaded was directed by Gregory J. Sinclair, who was a friend of Rob Sawyer's for many years. Sadly, we've just heard that Mr. Sinclair has died, and so we'd like to give our condolences to Rob and to Mr. Sinclair's family. We have with us today a very special guest, Mr. Robert J. Sawyer.
Hi, Phil.
Hi,
nice
Rob.
to be here.
Great. And when we say here, I'm in England, Colin's in Oregon, and you're in Toronto?
That's correct. 3 nations here.
So we've got some questions. Most of them are about The Downloaded, which is your new book coming out in May.
Whatever you want to ask is fine by me.
But of course, it first came out as an audiobook, a full cast audiobook.
Audible took a page from Netflix's program book. Netflix, as you may recall, started out simply as a distributor, actually of physical media, of DVDs through the mail of other people's content. And they transitioned to becoming one of the biggest original producers of film and TV content and realized that's where the money was. Well, Amazon was watching this transition and decided that they really needed to have original, exclusive to Amazon content. Audible content. Amazon owns Audible. Audible content. And so the Canadian division is headquartered in Newark, New Jersey, just like the American division. But nonetheless, they have some Canadians working out of there. And Audible Canada set out to do a slate of originals, signing some big-name Canadian writers of fiction and nonfiction. And they approached me, and we went back and forth quite a bit on the business matters related to this, because I did not want to write something just for Audible. My experience as a published author has been that book publishers will ask for the moon and then not use it, right? They want all these rights that they're not going to exploit. Well, we want all your translation rights. We want your film and TV rights. What are you going to do to market them? Nothing. But if somebody comes to us, we own a piece of that. Well, we had this conversation with Audible and said, Rob is happy to write something for you, but he's a book writer and he wants to carve out the book rights separately and film and TV rights separately because you are not in that business. And there was quite a bit of a headbutting between my agent and their legal affairs people, but we came to an agreement that Audible would have the audiobook rights in perpetuity, but only a 6-month in advance of book publication exclusivity. And that's how the project, The Downloaded, was born. It was conceived from the outset to be something that I could exploit in those 2 very different media, the audiobook space and as a physical paper book and, of course, ebooks.
It sounds like it's not something you would necessarily have thought of yourself, but when the opportunity arose, you looked at a way to make good from it.
Yeah, absolutely. I had no intention of writing this project. It wasn't even a bud in my mind of a story. And in fact, when we originally did the deal, I had pitched them a completely different project. And it was an AI takeover project, which when I pitched it to them, it seemed fresh-ish. There's still a lot of AI takeover going back 50, 70 years. But then Picard did a whole season, Star Trek Picard with AI takeover. The Orville had a whole season-long plot. Westworld was on TV. And I said to them, we can't do this now. I mean, my take is completely fresh, completely different. It doesn't, mimic anything, but it doesn't have any excitement about, there's going to be a new AI takeover thing. It's shop-worn at this point. And a couple of things happened besides what was happening on Picard and the Orville. COVID-19 happened. And originally, we were going to try to do fully immersive, interactive audio drama. And in fact, they'd hired as the producer and the director a man I'd worked with before. They hired Gregory J. Sinclair, who had been one of the key radio drama producers for the CBC, the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, back when the CBC had a vigorous radio drama department. And we had done a 1.5 hour radio drama, a decade or more previously. Remembered me fondly. We big science fiction fans, both of us. We were all set to get going, and then Audible called up and said, "Flag on the play, gentlemen. Our liability coordinators for COVID say we can't get more than one actor in the studio at a time. So you've got to envision something that can be done as single voice." And that was, that's what novelists do. But we want multi-voices. Single voice, but multi-voice. What are we going to do? And Greg was the one who gave us the template, him and me, the template by which I created the downloader, because he said one magic word, Rashomon, which is the Kurosawa film, a crime that's recounted to a judge in a series of conflicting and overlapping testimonies. I thought, that's it. And I went back and read the original Japanese short stories that it's based on. The title, Rashomon, comes from one story. The plot comes from another one called In a Grove. And I started looking at all kinds of other Rashomon-style properties and realized, that's going to work. The other constraint that shaped this in a way that never would have been my brief if I'd been writing a novel was being brief, brevity. Because originally, Audible had, back in 2020, their notion was that they wanted to get into the serialized audio drama space. So my contract called for me not to deliver one 5-hour audio drama, but to deliver 10, 30-minute installments. And in the end, it turned out, I think, wonderfully. But that was one of these, lightning in a bottle, all these ridiculous constraints that I thought, well, this is never going to work. And in the end, they motivated me and Greg to make it work.
That is terrific. And all of that preempts one of my questions coming up. But I might still ask the question when we get to it. Colin, have you got a question?
I do. So last month, The Downloaded was the #1 science fiction bestseller on Audible. And I was wondering, you've got a 30-year career writing. Are you ever surprised at the reception for some things that you write over others?
We wanted The Downloaded to be a success, of course. I have previously won an Audio Award, AUDIE, which is the Audio Publishers Association's award for Best Science Fiction or Fantasy Audiobook of the Year for my Calculating God, which was narrated by James Davies, and it was wonderfully narrated, but it was single voice, no sound effects, no nothing. I was a little bit nervous because Greg, our director-producer, has never met a sound effect or a music cue that he did not like.
Oh.
And I worried, given that all my previous books, Downloaded is my 25th novel, all my previous books are available as unsweetened, straight audio readings that have been very well received. And so I was nervous. I have a fondness for classic 1950s radio drama. X-1, Dimension X, these classic American science fiction radio shows. But there is no contemporary audience in Canada, negligible one in the rest of the world, for audio drama, which is why Greg was available for Audible to hire, because the CBC had shuttered its radio drama department. So I was nervous and very pleased that it ended up, #1 with a bullet. It did really well for Audible.
Excellent.
If you'd just written it as a novel, would you still have had a kind of episodic approach? Is that how you approach your novels, or are chapters a very different thing to episodes for you?
I tend to write short chapters. I did a lot of print journalism, which is where I cut my teeth as a writer. And in print journalism, it's short sentences, short paragraphs. 2 sentences is a paragraph, not 5, not 10, and short articles. I made my living in the 1980s writing 1,500 to maybe 2,500 word pieces, with 1,800 being the sweet spot for an article. Lo and behold, most of my chapters are 1,800 words, plus or minus. And so I end up with a lot of chapters in a novel, 100,000 word novel. Now, downloaded is 54,000. My immediately preceding novel, The Oppenheimer Alternative, was 110, so almost double the length. And I would have much shorter chapters. So I don't think of them as episodes per se. And a given chapter, even at 1,800 words, might possibly have 2, and sometimes I have longer chapters, 3 or 4 scenes in them. But when I teach creative writing, which I've done at the University of Toronto and other places, I always say your job is to end every scene, except the last, with a cliffhanger that will make the reader say, damn, I've got to get up in the morning. I've got an 8 a.m. meeting, and I can't go to bed because Robert J. Sawyer has hooked me, right? Or whoever the author is. So the compulsive, propulsive narrative structure of always having something that makes you say, I can't stop now, instead of, oh, that's a pleasant little moment of reflection. And yeah, I feel good about that. I can close this book, because you may never open it again. I never want you to be able to feel that way until the very end. And then at the very end, I want you to close the book and say, who can I talk to about this? Right? There's so many ideas. There's so much I want to argue about, get angry about, get excited about. Who can I debate this with? That's the Robert J. Sawyer formula. Little cliffhangers till the end. And then at the very end, you go, oh my God, I've got to talk to somebody about this. Not just because word of mouth is the best advertising, but because I've never wanted to write popcorn. I've never wanted to write junk food. I've never wanted to write, yeah, okay, that was good. I never want anybody, despite what I just said, I never binge watch television, right? I will watch an episode and stop because I want to reflect. If the show is any good, I want to reflect and think about, oh, what happened in that episode? Talk it over with people who've also watched the same thing. And if the show doesn't make me want to do that, if it makes me want to just mindlessly let the next episode play in sequence, I have no interest in it. So constructing it so that you can't put it down until the end, and then as soon as you put it down at the end, that you want to talk about the ideas with somebody else. That's my formula, if I have one at all.
I mean, it certainly worked with the audio version of the downloaded, because knowing that there were 10 episodes, I was planning to listen to 2 a day. And on the first day, I listened to 3.
All right. There we are. Yeah. And of course, because it was planned as episodes, there's a uniformity to the length. They didn't demand, it was not broadcast television, where if you have, an hour-long slot, you've got 48 minutes plus commercials on North American TV, and you have to hit it not 48 and 1 second, and not 47 and 59. You have to hit it exact. Audible didn't care to that level of it being constrained. They wanted roughly half an hour. So the chapters or episodes are roughly the same length, which was, fine. We've all seen the deleted scenes that, at least those of us who buy physical media and get to enjoy the special features that TV and movies have because of time constraints. Oh, that's a really good scene, but it won't fit in our 48 minutes. Or, Jesus, the Oppenheimer alternative, the Oppenheimer, not the alternative, my novel, but the Oppenheimer movie is already 3 hours. And anybody who remembers Oppenheimer has got, if they're a man, already has an enlarged prostate. We can't go any longer. So we have to cut it short at 3 hours, right? So,
So during the recording, were you involved with that because it was happening during COVID?
Nobody except the actor, one actor, sometimes we had actors for 2 or 3 days, the actor and the recording tech. And I don't know which of you would qualify as the recording tech on this podcast, but that person was considered expendable by Audible. So if they got COVID and died, that was okay. There are lots of recording techs.
Wow.
So the actor and the recording tech were physically in studio, mostly in Toronto. But for Brendan and Luke, the studios were actually in New York City. And Greg, the director, and me as the writer zoomed in to the recording sessions. And Greg, I have nothing but affection and respect for Greg because, most of the time they don't want the writer anywhere near the recording session. And Greg would, is that the way the line's supposed to be read, Rob? Or is that, was that sarcastic? I mean, I like to think it's implicit in the text. Is that sarcastic or legit or, whatever. And so I had more interactivity. I was on set for a good bit of filming of the ABC television series Flash Forward, based on my novel of the same name. And we had great directors, and every single one of them would have been entirely justified. Just throw me off the set or off the physical location when we were shooting on location if I opened my mouth at all and tried to interfere with them doing their job. The writer had no special stature ever in a television or film production. But yes, I was there for most of the recording and was thrilled. We have an amazing cast. Greg and I made a decision early on that we wanted all Canadians. Just because Greg's Canadian, I'm Canadian. The commissioning partner was Audible Canada in New Jersey. But it was going to be an Audible worldwide. But there's such a great pool of Canadian talent in all areas, including acting, that we felt we could have an entirely Canadian cast. And we did in the end, include Brendan Fraser as, worldwide star, Academy Award winner, but also, Canadian actor, Luke Kirby, Canadian actor, Vanessa Sears, Canadian actor, so on and so forth.
Do you have a favorite voice characterization from the people that performed?
They're all so incredibly good, so gifted. It is such a treat for an author to hear his, her, or their words performed so well. So I give prompts to all of them. But that said, yes, the only actor we named right up front, we said to Audible, here's who we want for Roscoe Cadulian. We want Brendan Fraser. And when we initially said that, they said, we'll go get him. And then he had the incredible bad taste to go and become a Best Actor Oscar winner in January, I guess it was, of last year. We said, well, that's it. We'll never get him. And Audible said, what do you mean? I said, well, he just won the Academy Award for Best Actor for The Whale.
Right.
And they said, yeah, isn't that great? And Canadian boy to boot, right? And yeah, but his price must have gone through the roof. And they said, yes, and we are owned by Amazon. We will pay it. Boom. So they landed him. They landed everybody on our wish list. Greg and I brainstormed the casting. Greg, besides the work he'd done for CBC Radio Drama, had also done a lot of work with Soul Pepper, one word, Soul Pepper, a theater company in Toronto, and knew all the greats of the Canadian theater scene. So Colm Feore, who does the voice of Raywan, the judge character in this, who most recently would be known to science fiction fans for being Werner von Braun in For All Mankind on Apple's TV series, Ron Moore's alternate history about the space program. But in Canada is an absolute theater legend and had won the Canadian Screen Award for playing not Justin Trudeau, our current prime minister, but his father in a miniseries about his father called Trudeau. And Colm Feore is just a superstar. So we came up with this. We want Colm Feore. We want blah, blah, blah. And they got them all.
Wow.
Were you ever tempted to approach William Shatner?
So I worked with Bill 20 years ago. And I have nothing but praise for Bill. He was a genius. He's brilliant. I created an animated TV series for Nelvana, Canada's largest animation studio. Nelvana has the distinction of having done the animated segments for the much reviled Star Wars holiday special. and where the character of Boba Fett was introduced. So they actually did the first depictions of Boba Fett, and they also did the Droids and Ewoks TV series, bunch of other. I created a science fiction TV series for them, which was to have been their first foray into CGI, computer-generated imagery. They were a traditional and very, very good cell animation house. And at the time, Bill Shatner had just come off of doing his Tech War TV series, filmed here in Toronto. And he had liked the special effects that had been done for Tech War so much that, like Gillette, he bought the company. And the company was called Core Digital Imaging, and they were an early CGI firm. So Bill was CEO of a CGI firm in Toronto, and they asked him to partner on the project I created, Exodus Mars. So Bill and I went around pitching it in Hollywood to the various potential buyers for a computer animated TV series, science fiction TV series. And my favorite pitch of all the pitches I've ever been involved in my whole life, and I pitched lots in Hollywood, as I said, I flash forward, I have a TV series, is Bill and I go in, I think it was at the Cartoon Network, and we walk in and there's this marble round coffee table and the execs are on one side and Bill and I are on the other, and Bill goes in, puts his feet up on the table, his hands behind his back, and he says, okay, you got Sawyer, you got Shatner, you got Nelvana. Any questions? And that was that was the launch, right? Unfortunately, we didn't sell it, and nobody was at fault. It was a great show; everybody loved it. But all the testing that Cartoon Network and Nickelodeon Kids and so forth had at that time said the audience is not responding to CGI. We would have bought this in a minute if it had been cell animation, but our audience, and then of course the great Pixar movies started coming out and all of this happened. And suddenly but by that point, Bill and I and everybody else, Nelvana had been sold and moved on to other projects. But so, yes, Bill, we did talk about Bill and he would have been spectacular. I mean, he is, but that said, you know, everybody can do a Bill Shatner impersonation, but really he is a physical actor. If you've listened to the animated Star Trek, watch the animated Star Trek, which was made in 73, 74, all of the power of Shatner's performance is gone because none of the gesticulations, none of the facial expressions are there. But he's one of the most compelling presences when you watch him on screen. You know, people say, oh, he overacts, but he doesn't overact. He fills the medium. And he is the only person from the original Star Trek ever to, in his career, to win Emmy Awards. In fact, he's won 2 for Best Actor, for one supporting and one, I think, lead for Boston Legal for Denny Crane. You know, none of the other actors ever approached that level. Nimoy got nominated all 3 years for Star Trek, but never won. So yeah, we thought about Bill, and I nothing but fondness and affection for him. But ultimately, we did not approach him.
I think you ended up with a really good cast.
I couldn't ask for better. And so nice. Everybody was so incredibly nice. You know, they're going in and they're hired for, you know, a day in most cases, some 2-3 days for some of the longer parts. But they're hired, they come in, they've read the material. It's one day out of their year. There was no particular reason for them to be supportive after the fact. You know, Vanessa and Andrew Fung, who did Penalong, the robot Andrew Fung is a Canadian Screen Actors Award winner, and he's co-star of Kim's Convenience, the most successful sitcom ever to come out of Canada. You know, we've become Facebook friends, and he's constantly remarking on things on my page and I on his page. They were all just absolutely wonderful. But this is what we get for insisting on an entirely Canadian cast. We have that trademark Canadian politeness, and it was 100% there.
Now, obviously, we haven't laid eyes on the book, The Downloaded, yet. But when readers get a chance to have the physical text in front of them, will it be very different from the audio version? I mean, is it literally the same text, or have you adapted it?
So it is and it isn't. It is the exact text that Audible bought from me. And remember, I said at the outset, well, we were constrained to one actor in a studio at a time. But when you listen to the downloaded, you will note that in each individual testimony, when it switches, when say Roscoe Cadulian says, and I said to Letitia Garvey, I said to her, bitch, listen up. And then it goes to Vanessa Sears's voice instead of Brendan Fraser's voice. That was not done in studio, right? They were recorded separately. And at the end, Greg said, damn it all, I hated that constraint. I've directed actors in radio drama my whole life and on, stage actors. I want to cut it together as if they were in the studio. So he did do that. And that meant that a lot of what would have been inner monologue, Vanessa, if we're recording Vanessa, and she's saying, well, what I wanted to say was this, and then I thought about saying that, and instead what I actually said was boom, only boom made it to the downloaded audio version. So I think as the writer, to me, the definitive version is the version that's coming out on May 7th. Pre-order now as a print book, and you can pre-order as an ebook worldwide in whatever format, whatever vendor you get your ebooks in, is the definitive version. And also, speaking of definitive, it's interesting. There is now a definitive reading of every single line that Brendan Fraser does. It's how he did it. There's a definitive reading of every single line that Luke Kirby does. It's how he did it. But when I write a book, it is a collaboration with you, the reader. I have to hopefully have made the characters rich enough. And if I give cues in the text where he said sarcastically, or he spat the words at him or whatever, that you hear them in your mind the way you want to hear them. It is a collaboration. And that disappears in the audio marketplace and in film and in TV. There is one way that the line was read, right? In whatever the fixed media production is. There's a different, subtly different reading and a collaboration in terms of film and television versus the source novel. What a room looked like, what a character looked like, what a person was wearing, the exact details. It's an imaginative collaboration with a book. And the reason books persist to this day is because people like to collaborate with the author rather than be spoon-fed. More people want to be spoon-fed. There's no question that film and TV are orders of magnitude bigger audiences than books. But books have a special place in the creative landscape because they are a collaboration. And I honestly think I have listened now, a couple of times to the downloaded finished production. But I will, in my dotage, go back and not listen. Say, I wonder what that thing downloaded was about. Now that I've completely forgotten it. I will go and read the book again.
So when we reviewed it, there were a lot of different science fiction references of elements that reminded us of other science fiction works. I think I counted 13 in total.
Oh, you got the tip of the iceberg. There are tons in there.
Yeah.
Tons in there. I love doing this. One of my best known short stories is called The Shoulders of Giants. It's not thematically about this, but it is so much the truth of being a science fiction writer or any kind of artist. We stand on the shoulders of giants. We stand on the work of all those who went before us and paved the way. And I love putting throughout my oeuvre, Download's my 25th novel, but every one of my books has subtle or sometimes not so subtle references to other science fiction works. There's also a lot of course, in the downloaded, because I made two of my characters, Roscoe Cadulian and Alan Smithy, or Jackson David Fingerly, his real name, into old movie buffs. So there's a lot of hearkening back to Humphrey Bogart lines and so forth. But yes, absolutely, it's deliberate. I have in my novel the Oppenheimer alternative. I have Johnny von Neumann, who created the modern architecture of computers. And he also programmed the first actual computer, ENIAC. And I have him say in the novel a line where he says to people who've come to look at the computer he's building now, I can tell you I programmed the calculating units in ENIAC, and I can tell you they're as archaic as dinosaurs to what I've built now. A whole new approach. Well, he's quoting verbatim, except with the names of the computers, Dr. Richard Daystrom from the Ultimate Computer episode of Star Trek. And I had one of my friends, I pointed this out recently on Facebook, who's a huge, huge Trekkie. And he says, oh my God, I was so absorbed in the story, I completely missed that. So I love that. For the Oppenheimer alternative, I actually put a guide online to the Easter eggs, as they've come to be called, the little hidden references to Planet of the Apes, $6 Million Man, Quatermass in the Pit, which maybe Phil will recognize the Quatermass name, a huge name in British science fiction, and so on and so forth. And there are a bunch of those in the downloaded as well. I haven't put together the cheat sheet guide yet for the downloaded, but I might prior to the book coming out on May 7th when it can be bought in the physical book form.
It's also really unique in that it had a ton of science fiction concepts. It's not a single fiction thing like, oh, well, we went to Mars, or we're on a space station, or there's genetics. Why so many different science fiction concepts in one book?
A friend of mine named Al Katarinsky has summed up the Robert J. Sawyer oeuvre. Any Robert J. Sawyer book like this, he says, the first idea is free, right? My job is to get you hooked on all the big ideas. And he says, the first idea is free. And then you're hooked, and there are a bunch of them. Why? Because John W. Campbell, Jr., who was the editor of Astounding Stories, still published today under a new title, Analog Science Fiction and Fact, famously said, the future doesn't happen one at a time. He used to constantly be rejecting stories where there was a flying car, but everything else is exactly the same. You have a robot, a household servant, but everything else is exactly the same. We've gone interstellar travel, but they're doing it like it was an 18th century schooner voyage, right? The future doesn't happen one at a time. And I thought, we're doing this for audio, and I knew that a lot of people would listen to this because of the way Audible was going to market it. It was going to be marketed that it was free if you had an Audible account. You didn't have to pay specifically for this title. And so many people had been lured into science fiction by George Lucas and thought that science fiction was mindless escapist entertainment that had negligible scientific content and really had, one basic idea of this story. A New Hope, the original Star Wars film, it's a classic MacGuffin plot. Somebody has stolen a thing that we claim is of value, and therefore we will chase after it. It happened to be the plans to the Death Star. And we will chase after it endlessly until we have them, and then the ending is dictated by what that thing of value happened to be. Oh, well, then we have to blow up the Death Star. That's it. I just watched last night, as we record this, the final season premiere of Star Trek Discovery. And they have the same exact template, which is there's this one thing, this secret Romulan book that the scriptwriter has said, Michelle Paradise in this case, is of incredible value. And so we will chase it till the last episode of the season, in which case we will have it. And then we will do what the book dictates that we have to do. Blah, blah, blah. I hate that kind of simplistic construction. So I thought, let's show, I already have my existing audience, and Audible was counting on my audience coming to and embracing this. But we knew they were going to do, and they did do, national TV advertising spots for the downloaded across Canada. My God, Brendan Fraser physically recorded new material for the ad. I wanted to show people what science fiction could do, and I wanted to show them that it isn't laser battles, and it isn't space fights, that it was about, can we cheat death, which is one of the themes of the downloaded. Is there technological ways where we might rehabilitate criminals, which is one of the themes of the downloaded. What about the rights of all this AI and sentient machines that we're creating, which is one of the themes of the downloaded, and on and on and on, and give people, not just because I knew for a lot of people, we also knew once we cast Brenda, that we were going to get a huge influx of people who were the Mummy fans, or people who were fans of, or The Whale, who had no interest in science fiction. I wanted to say, okay, I've got you for 5 hours. I'm going to teach you what science fiction is as literature, as character-driven drama, as the philosophical exploration of the biggest of questions. and I wasn't going to blow that opportunity. And that's why there's a density of content in the downloaded, because I knew I was preaching to the unconverted in many cases with this particular opportunity.
Well, I think it works for the converted as well.
Thank you.
Because I really enjoyed, I kept getting like, oh, there's this, and there's this, and there's this. And it was almost like playing sci-fi bingo.
Yes, so that's right. That's right. Yes.
Can I throw you a couple of science fiction titles and see whether you intended there to be echoes?
Sure.
I got an echo, I think, of Logan's Run.
Yes. So that's interesting. I never thought about that. Of course, it's funny. Late in life, I became friends with George Clayton Johnson, who co-wrote the original Logan's Run novel with William F. Nolan. And I had dinner with Bill Nolan and George one night, but George is the one I became friends with. I went to his 90th birthday party and so forth. I hadn't thought about the parallels to that. In fact, I don't even see them right now. So you tell me, Phil, what's the parallel?
There were a couple of things. I mean, there was this feeling that we had people. I think there was an episode of the TV series of Logan's Run that did deal with thawing people out who'd been frozen.
Oh, okay.
But
all right.
It was more the overall sense that these people were kind of confined, just like the people in Logan's Run are confined to these domed cities. Yes. I can't remember if that's in the book or whether that's just in the film. And there were bits when you had is it the Mennonites in your story?
Yes, the Mennonites.
That made me think, aha, the Star Lost.
Yes, now that is a deliberate reflection. The Star Lost, of course, was made here in Toronto at Glen Warren Studios, which no longer exist. Starred Keir Dullea, and had my friend, subsequently, it came out when I was 12 years old. I became great friends with Harlan Ellison and Ben Bova, who was the very frustrated science advisor. Ben was a friend of mine. And I became friends late in life with Douglas Trumbull, who was the special effects supervisor. And it was the worst piece of garbage imaginable when and Keir Dullea, his character, Devon, it was Amish. It was about an Amish community that had been preserved as one of many communities in separate biospheres on an ark taking the last survivors of Earth, hopefully off to a new home. But in fact, it's unfortunately on a collision course instead of a orbital course with the target star. And absolutely that was in my mind. But I quote in the novel, the downloaded, exactly where it came from in that particular book. I'm friends with Mike Lazaridis, who is the co-inventor of the BlackBerry, the world's first smartphone. And Mike has now invested his money in quantum computing. Anyways, I was having dinner with Mike maybe 15 or more years ago. And I said back when BlackBerry, hadn't been supplanted by the iPhone, where it was the number one smartphone brand in the world. And it was based, BlackBerry still, the headquarters is in Waterloo, Ontario, which is where the downloaded is set. And I said to Mike, doesn't it strike you as bizarre that you've made this high-tech empire and it's surrounded by old order Mennonites, by a customer base, quote unquote, who will never, ever, ever buy your product? And he said, no, Rob, you don't understand. It's perfect. The Mennonites are the backup plan for humanity. When all of this comes tumbling down, they're still going to be there. And that was a nugget that Mike gave to me, just a bon mot that he dropped over dinner conversation, but it had stuck with me. And subsequently, Mike invested hundreds of millions of dollars in quantum computing technology, again, in Waterloo, Ontario. And in fact, Mike likes to call Waterloo Quantum Valley, as a pun on Silicon Valley, which is, of course, in Northern California. And he handed me basically that template, quantum computing facility in Waterloo, Ontario. One of the things I know about quantum computers is that they work best when they're cryogenically frozen. In fact, I got to stand inside a quantum computer at D-Wave Computing, Canada's leading commercial quantum computing company in Vancouver. Some years ago, but after I talked to Mike, and they're all, they're cryogenically frozen. So it was the combination of what is cryonics good for? Only two things: cryogenically suspending human bodies and chilling quantum computers to dampen out decoherence effects. And boom, plus that line that Mike gave me about the Mennonites, the whole thing just kind of fell into place because, I guess because I'm friends with Mike Lazaridis. So I'll be sending him an autographed copy as soon as the book comes out on May 7th. But it's funny as you say that Logan's Run thing. The one that people haven't mentioned, and nobody has mentioned to me that I think is so blindingly obvious, is the Buck Rogers parallel. Because Buck Rogers is frozen for 500 years and wakes up 500 years later in this strange new world. And I deliberately made it 500 years in the Downloaded, and my characters are frozen and wake up inadvertently. They didn't intend to be buried or frozen for 500 years. And now I haven't waded through the thousands of reviews this has gotten in the Audible production, but nobody has mentioned that parallel to me. And to me, it seemed like the obvious homage.
Yeah, and I think we missed that one as well.
Yeah, we did.
And there's also, of course, the homage, because the greatest science fiction films ever made, I think, both came out the same year, 1968. The original Planet of the Apes and the original, well, the one and only 2001: A Space Odyssey. And in 2001: A Space Odyssey, they also have the cryogenically suspended 3 hibernating, as they call them, astronauts. They're not frozen solid in the film. They're way, way chilled down. But that imagery had stuck in my mind of astronauts frozen for a space voyage from when I first saw the film, and I did first see it in first run, 1968, in a Cinerama experience when it was in theaters.
You're so lucky. Thank you very much for spending time with us, Rob. Where can people go to find out more about your work?
I am lucky enough to be the first science fiction writer in the world to have gotten a website back in 1995. And so I have a great URL for it. It is sfwriter.com. S is in science, F is in fiction, writer.com. That's also my Ontario vanity license plate, SF Writer.
Cool.
sfwriter.com. And as we said earlier in the interview, as long as you remember my middle initial, if you Google Robert J. Sawyer, you will find the science fiction writer rather than the deadbeat dads and the guys who are doing 48 hours in the drunk tank and so on and so forth. You'll find me, Robert J. Sawyer, science fiction writer.
This has been terrific.
Yeah.
My pleasure.
So how was that, Colin? Did you enjoy talking to Rob?
I did. The guy, well, he's been around a long time. He's incredibly intelligent. He's got tons of awards. He's been in science fiction for decades.
Yeah.
Wow. I'm in awe.
And he's great to chat to, isn't he? He goes off on various tangents while he's talking about subject X. He goes off and talks about subject Y, and then steers himself back. He's not somebody who gets lost when he does that. But those tangents were quite fascinating. I wanted to ask him about everything that he said. And of course, it's an interview with a finite time span. So I didn't want to interrupt because I didn't want to spoil his flow. But no, he was great.
Yeah, I think I could have easily spent another hour talking to him about other things. Like, he was the guest of honor at Chengdu last year, and to hear about Chinese science fiction and fans and how the convention was in general, just to see what it was like, that would have been fun.
Yes, if only we had time. Actually, a little confession to listeners. When we interviewed Rob, there were a few tangents. Some of them were tangents we encouraged because we had some questions that weren't about the Downloaded. But the way I've edited that interview that you've heard today, it's very much focused on the Downloaded. And what I thought I would do is take the other stuff, the things that are more generic, and use those in a future episode of the podcast, if you think that's a good idea, Colin.
I like it, yeah.
Yeah, so expect to hear more from Rob in the future. Speaking of future, shall we move on to the past, present and future?
Yes.
Just looking at my list to see what I've got here. I've got one item which is past, one which is present, going into the future. I don't have any true future items this time. What have you got?
I think I have all three for this session.
Oh, very good. Well, let's hear your past item.
It turns out that 2024 is the 100th anniversary of the film The Last Man on Earth by John G. Blystone, which was adapted from a short story of the same name by John Swain in 1923.
Good grief. What was it called again?
The Last Man on Earth.
Have you ever seen it?
I haven't.
Has anyone ever seen it? I mean, does it exist anymore?
You know, I found this, and I've been thinking about it because in my other podcast we do adapted science fiction. I'm hoping we can find it on YouTube. It's adapted from a short story, and it's quite old, so I doubt that it's feature film length. But it would still be fun to go look at it.
Yeah, I can't say I've heard of that one. I have a book. It's the Something Encyclopedia of Science Fiction Film, and it's organised chronologically. And I did read it from cover to cover when I first got it. And it does start sort of around the turn of the 20th century with various short films and stuff. But it doesn't really get interesting until it gets to the films that you've heard of and have seen, which is, I suppose, Metropolis is probably the first science fiction film that most people would have heard of. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's quite fascinating. I've got a past item, which is really two linked items. Anyway, my past item is The Midwich Cuckoos by John Wyndham, which I reread and found that I still like it as a book. I always have liked The Midwich Cuckoos. But I realised that what I liked most about The Midwich Cuckoos is the beginning of the book, maybe the first half, and how the book resolves doesn't interest me quite as much. It's still good, but what I find most striking about the book is in the first half. And what happens in the first half is basically an English village gets cut off from the outside world because of some strange kind of force field that descends on it. And then 9 months later, every woman in the village gives birth to a child. So something has come from somewhere, aliens presumably, have descended on this village and impregnated all the women. So it's quite a shocking story for the 1950s, I think, for an author to have been talking about that in a sort of a mainstream science fiction novel. Now, 2 years ago, or 3 years ago, there was a British TV miniseries based on The Midwich Cuckoos. When this TV miniseries came out, it got really very poor reviews in British newspapers and so on. And so I didn't bother watching it. I thought, this is going to be terrible. I watched the first episode, and the first half hour was pretty terrible because they'd thrown away the entire book and they'd written a kind of soap opera with a different cast of characters. And we meet the characters, we get to know their lives, their motivations, how they interact with each other. And then the thing happens to Midwich. And at that point, it gets interesting because it starts doing what the book says. And I found that really annoying. One of the things that's really good about the book is that it goes straight in. The very first page of the book, you've got people who are coming back to the village from a night in London and they find they can't get home because the road's blocked. So you've immediately got the science fiction concept is right there on the front page, interfering with people's lives. And it's fantastic. But the TV series says, no, we've got to introduce all these characters, we've got to find out who they are. And it really very much annoyed me, which is a very British reaction to things, is to be annoyed.
Interesting. It's interesting you say you were annoyed with it, and that's a very British thing, because that's the reaction of the characters. They want to go home, and they say, well, you can't go this way because the road's blocked. And they say, well, can we drive around to the other side? Because it's one of those towns, it's small. There's one road in and one road out.
Yeah, that's right.
And they're like, no, that road's blocked too. So their solution is to go out into a field and try and go cross country. I'm like, wow.
That's right. Yeah, it's how dangerous can this thing be? It's just a small village,
Yeah.
But no, it's really good. One of the other things that annoyed me about the TV series is it's not a village. It's a small town. It's suburbia. And I suspect they might have done that because they identified a place where they were able to film, and it doesn't look like a village, it looks like suburbs. But then once you make it so it's not a village, you don't have that thing that you've just referred to of there's only one road in and one road out. Now It's a suburb, there's lots of ways in. And so instead of having this dome-shaped force field that descends on Midwich. In the TV miniseries, it's a couple of blocks. It's a few roads are cut off. So it no longer has this kind of visual idea of the hemisphere that descends. Now it's just, well, there's a kind of a no-go area, and part of it is bounded over there, part of it's bounded over there, and it just loses all sense of clarity. And that's one of the things I hate in an adaptation, is where people have choices to either do what the book did or not. And every time they've chosen not to do what the book did, they chose a bad thing. They chose a bad alternative. Sometimes you can find a good alternative, and I've got no objection when people do that. But to say, oh no, we won't do that good thing that they did in the book. We'll do something bad like this. What else have you got? Have you got a present item?
I do right now, and I think I mentioned this last month that this was coming up.
Yeah.
OMSI, which is the Oregon Museum of Science and Industry, their science fiction film festival is going on right now, and it has been for the last 3 weeks.
Right.
And for my son Tim's birthday, I bought him a festival pass so that we could go and see any movie that he wanted or any movie that I wanted. And we've seen 4 movies so far. 4 movies. Yeah, we saw Gravity, The Iron Giant, and last night was a double feature. Invasion Fest, I called it, because it was the 1953 George Powell War of the Worlds, followed by Edge of Tomorrow with Tom Cruise and Emily Blunt.
Oh, what a strange combo.
Yeah, well, Earth Invasion.
Yeah. Oh, yes, I see the thematic connection. But
yeah,
interesting.
And I had this idea, and I come up with all kinds of ideas, and some of them are good infrequently. As I thought about it, I became really curious about how do you get access to so many movies at once? And from the complete work of science fiction movies, how do you choose which ones to put? And then how do you arrange them? Like, should this movie go with that movie? And, which days and how many times can I show it?
Yeah.
And I thought it might be fun to try and interview the person who is the coordinator for that film festival.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. Yeah. Have you been able to pinpoint who that is?
I did. I got a business card last night from the information desk. And if you're interested, I can reach out to them and see if they're interested in joining us for an interview.
Yeah, I think that would be great. I've got a present item which extends into the future a little bit. This week I took possession of a new book, a new paperback book, which is called Harlan Ellison Greatest Hits. Harlan Ellison is one of the greatest, I was going to say science fiction writers of the 20th century and 21st century. Also one of the greatest writers, full stop, in my opinion. And he died a few years ago. And at the time of his death, he didn't really have any of his books coming out from major publishers. They had all originally come out through major publishers, and often they'd been published in hardcover and then in paperback, and many of them had a very long life going from one publisher to the next. But there came a point where he kind of got tired of dealing with publishers and more or less went the self-publishing route, and he was able to put out some kind of definitive texts. So all of his books came out through his own imprint in the last decade of his life. But that means that his books were no longer available through mainstream outlets. When he died, J. Michael Straczynski, the creator of Babylon 5, was appointed the executor of the Ellison estate. And so he's made it his mission to get Ellison back in mainstream bookshops. And the first fruit of this work is Greatest Hits, which is a volume you can buy from all good bookshops, and it's on display in many Barnes and Nobles currently in the US. And the calling it of Greatest Hits really is to attract new readers. And some of the existing readers have been nitpicky about the artwork on the cover, the title of the book, the disclaimer at the beginning, the selection of stories and all of that. And I think none of that really matters because the book isn't aimed at the existing fans. It's aimed at new readers. And I think it's an excellent strategy that hopefully will pay off.
So my future item is about a remake of a movie. It's a well-loved movie from the 1980s called The Running Man.
Oh, yes.
And what many people don't know is that's actually based on a book by Richard Bachman called The Running Man. And much like the adaptation of The Midwich Cuckoos, the Arnold Schwarzenegger movie and the book are only distantly related by a name, the name of the movie and book, and a character. That's pretty much it. All the rest of it is completely missing. Yeah. Now, the movie is great fun and has been, and is, I recommend it to people that like science fiction and action movies. But it's going to be remade, I think, by Edgar Wright. And he's promised to be very faithful to the original material. Yeah. And it's coming out in 2025, and that's significant because the book is set in 2025.
Oh, wow.
And I think it's going to be a great opportunity for not only science fiction, but a lot of current social and cultural commentary.
Excellent. Well, I think that's about it for today, folks. Our thanks to Robert J. Sawyer for joining us to discuss The Downloaded. We're Phil Nichols and Colin Kusky, and our theme tune is from Purple Planet at purpleplanet.com. Check out the show notes at 101sf.blogspot.com, and please give us a glowing 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your pods. And we'll see you next time.